Namaste, Assalamu alaikum, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, friends. Very sorry for late. It is already 5 minutes late due to some technical reason. Sorry for that. I'm Radha Paudel, founder and CEO of Global South Coalition for Dignified Menstruation. First, I'm wishing you all a very happy and exciting 2025. Now I am speaking from the Secretariat Office of Global South Coalition for Dignified Menstruation based in Kathmandu, Nepal. As you all know, Global South Coalition for Dignified Menstruation is spontaneously formed a global network for changing narratives around menstruation from hygiene to dignity and from 5 days bleeding to life cycle approach. Since beginning, it has been conducting various programs such as research, webinars, conferences, trainings, fellowship programs, and etc. In this connection, today we are ready for the book talk. And this book talk is already Facebook Live. Those who are available, please follow the Facebook Live and please forward your comments, feedbacks. We will try to respond now. If not, we will respond in next webinar. And then if you are busy, you can watch the this discussion in our YouTube channel, Dignified Menstruation YouTube channel. And today our book talk is the title of the book is Reorganizing Menstruation. It has written by renowned fellow Dr. Lara Owen. She has already here. She's not only the author of this book, she's also teacher and consultant for menstruation. She's here with us virtually. Let's welcome to her. Welcome, Dr. Lara.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah. We were so happy and honored to have you. Thank you very much for agreeing to discuss about your book, Reorganizing Menstruation. Friends, definitely we won't discuss details about the book because you need to find the book and read thoroughly. So we'll discuss the key features of the book and the menstrual movement all around the globe. Dr. Lara, would you share about the motivation of writing this book? Why did you write? And what would happen if you were not writing this book?
Well, first of all, Radha, thank you very much, and to all your team for inviting me today. It's a real privilege to be able to speak always to people all over the world, but particularly to your information, your organization that does so much good, particularly in the Global South. So I'm really pleased to be here. It's all my fault that we were a bit late starting. I'm really sorry about that. I got confused. I thought I was supposed to sign on through Facebook. Okay, so why did I write the book? Well, several reasons, but the dominant reason, I think, was because feminism in the Western world particularly did not engage with menstruation for a very long time. Menstruation was left out of a lot of the policies that were created, the discussions that were being had, the books that were written. And there were various reasons for this. One of them, I think, was that some feminists had an internalized shame around menstruation, which meant that even though they were feminists, they found it difficult to speak about or write about or study the topic. Study of the topic at university level was actively discouraged until fairly recently. And even in the last few years, I've heard people saying, well, I did my Ph.D. on menstruation, but now I'm going to study other things because it won't advance my career if I stick to menstruation. So there's this deeply seated bias against menstruation and against developing knowledge around it. And that affected everything, including feminism. So I was particularly interested in how feminist theory, how feminist ways of understanding the world had developed over the past 100 years without reference to menstruation. What was this missing piece? And if we brought it in, how would that actually change our understanding of the broader effects, not only on women, but also on society? Because we have a lot of research showing us that oppressing women has a negative effect on society. But we had very little discussion about how oppressing menstruation, particularly, has negative effects that deeply affect women, but also affect everybody. So I wanted to look at menstruation from that, really wide angle and consider it within a socioeconomic theoretical perspective to build feminist theory so that there were ideas and language and understandings and concepts with which to talk about menstruation, particularly in the light of capitalism and the way that capitalism has used menstruation and used menstrual stigma to sell products, to make profit, to put luxury sales tax on menstrual products, and all these things that we know about now, but that were not addressed by feminists or by anybody really until the last 10 years. So that was a big piece of the motivation for the book.
Thank you very much. It's really, really very insightful. When I go through the first chapter, which is available in the website when you release the book, and then when I was going through it, and I sensed exactly the same what you were saying now. And no one talk about the menstruation. There are so many feminist theories, and no one like to talk. And while I started to speak publicly, because coming from the Nepali rural poor family background, though at the individual level I have a very long history of working on menstruation, like more than 40 years since I did, but it took so long time to get the attention at the national and the global level. And most of the feminist organizations and the friends, they excluded me, they blame me, and they don't like to work on it. And even the funding opportunities, they rejected. I mean, the denied at the last moment. They visited our office. Oh, everything is very nice, but you are not the feminist organization. You talk about the menstruation, so we cannot do it. Sorry, this is how I face. And then I keep following you in LinkedIn and the Instagram, and when I read that page, oh, she's really my tribe. I have to speak. So this is how I also motivate to have this book talk. Thank you very much for enlightening. It's really mm, the the big milestone in a not only the menstrual movement but also the entire human right and the feminist movement globally. So I really agree. The build the feminist theory, the way you articulate build the feminist theory is really boom. I love it. I salute you. Congratulations once again.
Thank you.
Yeah, I feel like so much energy right now. And with this background, would you share about the nature of the book? How many chapters? Where is it available? Who could have it? Can you show the books? Let's have a lunch in 125. Please.
So the book is published by Oxford University Press, which in itself, getting it published there was a really interesting process because um, it was difficult for the editor there, who was very supportive of the book, but it was difficult for him to find people qualified to assess the book. So to peer review it, because there's just not enough knowledge, deep knowledge in the field. But eventually that got sorted out and the book was published. So I'm very lucky to be published by Oxford University Press because that's the biggest academic press in the world and it sells its books everywhere. So it means that it's available all over the world, definitely should be available in India. And I'm not sure about Nepal, but I would think so. Um, and so it has, I think, does it have 9 chapters or 10 chapters? Let me check. Um, it has 9 chapters. Yeah, I thought I
Would
would
you
have done
say
that.
that? Would you show the book like a launch? Yes.
So this is the book.
Yeah.
Um, and then that's the back cover. So it doesn't have an image on it. It's very difficult to find an image for menstruation that either hasn't been used many times before or is sort of yeah, just not very interesting. So I decided to go with no image at all and just really focus on the words. Um, yeah, so the book has 10 chapters and it builds through the situation that we're in now, both in terms of society, but also in terms of how knowledge is being created. So, how we're creating knowledge around menstruation and where the big gaps still are. So much that we don't know, so many assumptions that are being worked from that aren't really grounded in reality. Um, and and then I talk about the research that I did between around 2016 and 2018 in Australia and in the UK. So I did a research project on menstrual cups and how that using a menstrual cup changes the relationship with menstrual blood and what that tells us about how conventional disposable products have been shaping our relationship with menstrual blood over the last, well, 50 years, 60, 70 years in developed countries or, high income countries and a shorter period of time in low to middle income countries. But that absorbing, when you see menstrual blood, when it's absorbed into something that's disposable, so practically all the blood is gone. It often looks sort of dark brown. It's not, doesn't have the vibrancy of blood as it's flowing out of your body. Um, that how seeing that blood differently, how that affected these young women's relationship to their menstrual blood and to the idea of menstruating. And there were other impacts as well. And one of the reasons I wanted to study that group in particular, this was undergraduates at a university in Melbourne, so leading a fairly privileged life and very interested in sustainability. And their reason for using the cup was because of the sustainability, the environmental aspect of it. So I wanted to find out what they were thinking. And what I found was this really interesting mixture of ideas that you could say were pro menstruation, that were about not stigmatizing it, but also tied in with very sort of current ideas about convenience, that convenience is a really high value. And that's, in a sense, part of a neoliberal capitalist view of the world, where in order to experience convenience as much as possible, you have to buy lots of things. It's very good for capitalism, the idea of convenience. You make things that are disposable, and anything that's disposable is very easy to make a profit from because people just throw it away and buy another one. So that's much better in a neoliberal capitalist economy than something that someone will keep for a long period of time. So there were the ideas that they had, I saw were actually some of them were subverting or going against that way of thinking of buy a new thing all the time. But some of them were also actually part of the support network for that kind of idea, if you like. So it's interesting to see how tangled a lot of ideas have become. We can see the same thing in what's called the wellness industry, which is, all about sort of more natural methods of healing, which has also been sort of inflected through ideas about privilege and various other. I won't get sidetracked into that, but so that was one group that I studied, and then the other group I studied was a company that was developing a menstrual policy for women in their workplace to be able to adjust their working schedule to their menstrual cycle. And this was the first, sort of the first time that we know of that a company of any kind of significant size, actually, well, it was still a small company, but more than a few people. There were 36 people working there when I started the research. Most of them were women. And it was the first time that someone had actually constructed a menstrual policy from scratch in an organization that had women and men working in it. And it was done very thoughtfully. And of course, they bumped into along the way all sorts of issues with how do you construct this so that it's not called unfair by the other side or by people who don't menstruate or whatever. So, and again, I was looking at the ideas that lay behind the desire to have that kind of a policy, and where things got confused and complicated sometimes because the ideas were, without people wanting to do it, there were clashes within the very idea itself, partly because, or largely because, menstruation has been stigmatized for so long. It's so deeply held through religions, through various other kinds of mechanisms, through menstrual advertising of menstrual products in the 20th century. That was one way that menstruation was actually further stigmatized, um, because largely because the concept of leaking became so terrible that it would be a terrible, terrible, terrible thing if anybody saw any evidence of menstruation. So it takes quite a long time to disentangle all of those different influences. And I'm sure you've found this in your work. You've been in it, doing it for a long time. And it's actually a big job taking on menstrual stigma, I think. It's really complicated. And so part of my writing the book was about identifying those different strands of thought and how they actually can conflict with each other, and that this also can, unless we pull that apart and understand more about what we're doing and what we're saying and what words we're using, then we run the risk always of reproducing menstrual stigma in another way.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. You explain the two concepts, um, eh, and your research in organization and the menstrual cup. Mm, Actually, we can talk only in the menstrual cup or only in the organization. It's a very, very complex, very huge topic. Let me go back again about the book. Usually, the menstruation related books has a different kind of name and related with the very peak words. And then, while going through the book's name, the reorganizing menstruation is really, I found, is a philosophical kind of articulation of the two concepts. Some extent you have already addressed, even though I like to know the motivation to come up with that name, reorganization, the menstruation.
Yeah, so my PhD was done within a department that focused on organization studies in a business school in Melbourne in a department of
Mhm.
management. So so organization studies is a relatively new discipline. It was really identified and developed in the 1990s and has gone on to become an important part of management studies. So understanding how we organize our lives is actually a brilliant way in, I found, to understanding something because it's not ideological in itself. You're actually going, well, how do we organize this? What are we actually doing? And what does that tell us about human nature, about our motivation, about what we want to achieve, about our aims? And what does it tell us about where we're not getting things right or we're not doing things actually in a useful way, but we've been doing them so long, we're still doing it? So I'll just back up and tell you a little of the history of organisation studies because that will help to explain. So in the 1990s, money for universities, money that governments were allocating, that funders were giving to universities, started leaving subjects that were less immediately practical, like history, psychology, some of the social sciences. That money started going into business schools. So people who had previously been in history departments, like me, I did history for my first degree. So people who'd been in history, psychology, sociology departments started getting jobs in business schools because business schools knew early on that in order to understand human beings, you actually have to have people who've studied human beings. So also from anthropology is another discipline that merges with business studies. So you get this, the jobs start to move from those other disciplines into business schools. So then you start getting ideas developing around, well, how is human nature and um, um, human thoughts, human needs, how does that intersect with the world of business, the world of capital, the world of economics? And so, in a sense, organizational studies represents a sort of human-centered part of the business school. And what I found was that because when I was going to do this PhD, I applied first of all to history departments and to women's and gender studies departments. No one wanted me to study menstruation in those schools. Or if they did, there was a block like you're talking about. Like I would get all the way through and then somebody would say, no, we don't want to do menstruation. No, go away. And then I came across some academics working in a business school who were studying menopause. And I said to them, I'd like to look at menstruation through this lens, in this way. And they said, fantastic, come and study with us. And, I managed to get a full scholarship and get, fully funded. And so it's actually part of why this book is called Reorganizing Menstruation is in itself part of the story of what you were mentioning earlier on, that there has been a block on studying menstruation, on getting funding for it, and that I had to go a different route than I expected in order to get that. But in fact, it turned out to be absolutely the best thing because in organization studies, because it started off as being populated by people from different disciplines, it is still a very multidisciplinary area of study. And menstruation is always multidisciplinary. You have to be able to look at it through multiple angles. You can't just see it as a medical event. You can't just see it as a social or religiously constructed event. You have to be able to look at it through these different lenses. And I was working in a department that allowed me to do that, that supported me to do that. And so I was able to do what's called ethnographic research, where you use research methods that are informed by anthropology, so that are very good at getting deep into, well, people's everyday lives and why are they doing it this way? And what does that tell us? So you developing methods of research that involve not only interviews, but also, and I also talk about this in the book, and I developed this way of analyzing research interviews that could take account of menstrual stigma by listening to the interview, not just reading the transcript, but listening to when people spoke strongly and when they spoke weakly. When were they clearly upset and emotional, or when were they just feeling empowered? And I'll give you an example of what I found there. I found that when women spoke about their own symptoms, their own pain, their voices would go down and get quieter, and they would often sound emotional. But they also would sound as if they were a bit ashamed to be speaking about their own symptoms and their own pain, and as if they shouldn't really be admitting to having pain. Um, and but then when they spoke about group action, like something they were doing in a group to combat menstrual stigma, they would sound very strong and very confident.
Mm.
So that in turn helped me to understand really the power of the menstrual movement, because it stops menstruation being only an individual act in which it's quite difficult to get out from under the shame that you've been taught socially. But then when you get together in a group, all of that changes and people feel empowered to act because they're acting on behalf of their sisters. And of course, as women, we're trained to put others first. So that's, that's a good training in some ways, spiritually, perhaps, but it's also not a good training when it comes to making a noise in public about something that's important to us, which again is back to this idea of feminism and menstruation. It's that same thing.
Thank you very much. Your each word is a kind of mind blowing. Each sentence, each word. It's really um, uh, delighted to have you in this conversation. If we go through the history of the decent work, it is about century history. And nowadays, people talk about the human-centered approach in organization. Mental health is very much popular nowadays, and organizational behavior. There are so many strategies works up to make the business perfect, but no one think about the mensuration. And the Sustainable Development Goals, the goal number 8 is all about the decent work. And none of the SDGs out of 17 and the goal 8, decent work, don't touch about the menstruation at all, which is really, really sad. And in this scenario, your book, your hard work really gave a different kind of milestone to think differently. I'm really proud of you. You keep talking about the menstrual stigma. And how do you see the scope of the menstrual stigma itself? Is it cover all kind of discriminatory perception and practices, or we just try to because there are so many theories, and this is how we keep talking about the menstrual stigma, or is it because of the easy to bring the issue forward? So how do you think? Do you get my point?
No, I don't quite understand the question. Can you say that again?
Yeah, you have been talking a lot about menstrual stigma. What is the scope of the menstrual stigma? Does it cover all forms of menstrual discrimination of a menstruator's experience throughout the life cycle or not?
Um, I think it's a catch-all term that is used for any way in which menstruation is seen in a negative light that has the effect of oppressing the menstruator. So it expands out to the rest of your life as a woman. If something you do for a week every month that you can't help doing, that's a natural part of your body, if you're told that that's wrong, bad, toxic, whatever the social construction is, it also affects you if you're told that it's nothing, which is what tends to happen in industrialized countries. The idea about menstruation has become that it's nothing to talk about, that it's nothing to complain about, that you should either suppress it by taking the pill all the way through, or you should just use a tampon and act like it's not there. So that's another form of menstrual stigma, because in fact, pretty much everyone who menstruates knows you feel different when you're bleeding than when you're not. You've got an extra thing to take care of. And most women do have symptoms around menstruation. So something's happening in their body. And the thing that I discovered from my early research that I did mainly in the 1990s, which my first book, which you may know, Her Blood is Gold, is about, was that if I rested when I had my period, then I wouldn't have symptoms the next month. So that there is a relationship between how we treat our bodies when we're bleeding, especially if we're very symptomatic, and then our long-term health and our menstrual well-being and capacity for the months to come. And of course, it's become normal for women to engage in a lot of behaviors that aren't supportive of a healthy menstrual cycle, like overworking, drinking. This might not be so much a thing in India, but certainly in many countries, drinking alcohol normally, like every day. that doesn't work as well for women. Women, the liver behaves differently. Female hormones interact with alcohol. So there's these sort of normal behaviors that have become normal, even in the last 20 years, that really go against women's reproductive well-being, and particularly the menstrual cycle and menopause are affected. So there's other things too, like a fast food diet, a lot of salt and sugar in the diet, et cetera, et cetera. So, so there's ignoring it is, in my mind, almost as just as bad and in some ways worse than having negative religious practices, um, because it sort of neuters women in a way. It says that this thing that you do that is a result of um, your female reproductive system is unimportant and doesn't mean anything and isn't useful, and you might just as well not do it. And I think that's very, very damaging message that even girls get that very young. Girls going into having their first period have already internalized that message or more overt negative messaging around menstruation. So all of these things constitute menstrual stigma. Now, I prefer the term menstrual stigma to menstrual taboo because taboo, I think, is often a misused word. It has very particular connotations, and a taboo is often something that is a taboo for a very good reason. For example, the incest taboo. That's not a taboo we want to dismantle or change. That's a taboo that's very important for human beings on biological, social, and relational levels, and stops abuse happening within households, for example. So um, there are taboos can be things that really should be taboo. So when we use the term taboo with menstruation, we're almost reinforcing the taboo by saying that, well, menstruation, yes, of course it's taboo. That's the implication. And taboo is a narrower term. Stigma you can use much more broadly. And it you also get to a different place in terms of developing concepts around it, because theoretically we know more and we know different information about what happens when um, a person's behavior or something that they do without being able to help it is stigmatized. And this starts with research that was done in the 1960s about disability, stigma around disabilities. And so, I'm not the first one to do this with menstruation. Other people have also done this to work from that research around disability and how the person with the disability is stigmatized economically and in other ways, how that applies. We can use that to apply it to menstruation. So I think it's a much more useful way to understand negative ideas around menstruation now. And it also does include minimization more successfully, which the term menstrual taboo doesn't really. So I don't use the term menstrual taboo.
Yeah. Mm. Thank you. Thank you. It meant a lot. Here in Global South Coalition, we use the word of the menstrual discrimination.
Yeah.
Menstrual discrimination is an umbrella term that includes silence,
Hmm.
taboo, stigma, shame, restriction, abuses, violences, deprivation from services and resources that associated with the menstruation throughout the life cycle of the menstruators. This is how we define, because as a survivor of the menstrual discrimination, so many things what I experienced myself and I observed while having the work or research, these things are not incorporated. So later we define, let's say, menstrual discrimination. So we can include everything and we can define all aspect of the discriminatory perception and practices associated with the menstruation. This is how we define. Thank you very much,
No,
Surya.
I agree. Discrimination is a really useful word, also because at the moment we have a lot of emphasis on equality legislation and practice policies. So it fits into that,
Yeah.
which is very useful. Yeah.
Thank you, thank you. And you are working in university. I saw your post time and again the MA in contemporary menstruation, and
Yes, although I don't teach that through a university. I teach that privately through
Ah,
my own website. So
ah.
if you go to my website, which is laraowen.com, you
Mm-hmm.
can find out about it. So this is a master's level course that I teach, and I've had to do it privately because no university is yet interested in running a course like this. So
Mm-hmm.
let's do it
One day,
privately.
one day.
One
Yes,
day, yeah,
sir.
one
Yes.
day.
They
Yeah.
have to. No way.
No, absolutely.
No way.
But part of the reason why is because in order to teach about menstruation successfully, you have to do it in a multidisciplinary way.
Mm-hmm.
You have to include different disciplines. And that's quite difficult to do at universities because we still have this division into disciplines, which is how we
Yeah,
organize the universities. So
yeah, yeah.
that's one of the reasons it's a bit tricky. There are courses taught at universities, but there's not a master's course in menstrual studies yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been teaching year one of the course. I'm going into my fourth year of teaching it this year. And then
Mm-hmm.
this year, I'm also teaching a second year. So there's year
Mm-hmm.
one and year two. And I've had people come to the course from all over the world, which is really wonderful. And that is one of the benefits of teaching online is that people can take the course from all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
yes, it's been, it was such a leap of faith when I started doing the course. I didn't know what would happen with it, but it's been really successful, I think. Yeah,
Yeah,
people and seeing the difference in people at the beginning of the course and at the end is fantastic because it gives them the confidence and the language and the understanding to be able to develop their own businesses or to develop go forward and do a PhD and sometimes they decide during the course what they actually want to focus on because that's quite hard if you can't do an undergraduate degree or a master's degree in your topic you come
yeah,
into it at PhD level and then you have to sort of start all over again to understand
yeah,
it
yeah,
um, so it helps people making that transition yeah, so it's just absolutely a joy to teach, and the people who come into it. I mean, I found this always with the people who get involved in menstruation. They're just generally such fantastic people, you know. So
yeah,
brave and
yeah,
committed and
yeah.
a lot of great
And
qualities.
they are the passionate and out of the box people because doing master degree,
Yeah,
the time and the money and the everything
yeah,
it's
yeah,
not a joke.
yeah.
And we also feel that once you started the course over there, our books, our reading materials, which is available in Amazon, are also increased to, I mean, the byte. Um, um,
Yes, can I just mention that there is a scholarship program for the course, and it actually the applications for it just opened on January
mm,
1st.
wow.
So it's just this month you need to apply if you want to apply for a scholarship. There aren't
Uh,
any full scholarships because I don't have funding for that, but I do offer a 75% reduction for people who
mhm.
live in low to middle income countries. So you can,
Okay.
if you go to my website and you go to the page for Contemporary Menstrual Studies Year One and scroll down to the bottom, there are instructions about how to apply for a scholarship. And I've had quite a few students from India, from Nepal, Pakistan, that region who've been able to get scholarships.
Okay. Let my colleagues to extract that information and share through our website as well.
Thank
And
you.
if anyone like to connect with you, I will share the information about the scholarship and about you. Thank you very much for the special consideration for the people who are from the global south. I wanted to touch a little bit about the medical science. Now, you mentioned in a book, medical science reflect the broader lack of acknowledgement of menstruation and has been slow to research menstrual physiology, symptomology, and treatments. Would you explain a little bit more based on your writing, based on your overall experience?
Well, there's so many different ways to look at this. I mean, the most recent thing, I went to a conference on fibroids
Mm-hmm.
at Cambridge University a couple of months ago. And it was quite a big conference with a lot of sort of, high level medical researchers and professors and people from the British Medical Council. And And yet, the level of discussion about fibroids, about what causes them, about the treatment for them, about heavy menstrual bleeding and the treatments that are available for that, the level was so basic. And the main, really, sort of theme was we just don't know enough about this. We can't get the funding for the research. The research hasn't happened. We just don't understand even the basic mechanisms for this. And we certainly don't really know how to treat it. And there is still so much prejudice against something that happens in the uterus and something that usually involves heavy menstrual bleeding because of the stigma around menstrual blood. So it's just astonishing. This is in 2024 at one of the top universities in the world with some of the best researchers, or best, the most experienced researchers, all scratching their heads going, we just don't know. Um, and there were so what it became, it was a bit like being in a conference on menstruation, particularly a few years ago, where most of it was people standing up and talking about their own experience because that was all they had to offer as data was, well, this is what happened to me. And for a long time, that was what happened with menstruation was like, this book, Her Blood is Gold, published in 1993. When I wrote that, all I really had was my own experience to go on and that of a few other women who I interviewed and who I talk about in the book. But there was just no data. And so we see that it comes through in lots of ways. I mean, we understand that around 75% of women experience pain with menstruation. Particularly, the percentage goes up in women between 18 and 24. That's the age group that experiences the most pain, or so it seems. Now, we don't know why this happens. We still don't know whether it is indeed, as my mother and her friends told me when I was growing up, just a natural part of being a woman. They told me it was your body getting used to, getting prepared for having a baby. That was their idea of it, that something about this pain was part of a preparation for being able to birth a child. Now, we tend to just discount all of those things. We go, oh, no, it can't be that. Da, da, da. But we don't actually know. Maybe it is. Maybe there's some other reason for it. It does seem, we do know there's a relationship between lifestyle and pain. We've got some information about that, but we don't understand the mechanisms by which this happens. There are some medical researchers now who are working on a theory that the uterus itself secretes some female hormones, that it's not only a bag that gets filled up with blood and endometrium and then, a baby, that actually it's doing more than that. But we don't know. This is, a theory. So well, obviously, we don't know about endometriosis, what the cause is. We understand a bit like there does seem to be a relationship between childhood trauma and endometriosis, possibly later trauma and endometriosis that develops later on in life. So, we understand there more now about the possible relationship between what happens to us psychologically, mentally, and what happens with our reproductive system, with our hormone balance. We have a bit more idea about how that might be working, but we don't know how to treat that. What medication, are there any medications for that? Is it better to have psychotherapy and work through your trauma that way? So it's just extraordinary how still women will go through really powerful, debilitating symptoms like extreme pain, like heavy menstrual bleeding, and just be given hormones that the doctor doesn't really know. Nobody really knows. Well, yes, this might suppress your period, or being offered a hysterectomy is the only solution because nobody really knows what's happening. So, yeah, there's what the thing that's really good now is that there are great people working in medical research who now understand what we don't know and are looking at it. So that's a big step on from 40 years ago, where this stuff was just routinely ignored and not paid attention to. So I think we're going to see some really interesting developments over the next 10 years. My main concern, though, is that people may be unwittingly thinking about it, so therefore conceiving of their research, designing research with some kind of menstrual stigma in the background. So
Yeah.
with an attitude that's kind of against menstruation. What I haven't seen any of, and this is something that crops up a lot in the course that I teach, because of some of the people who are attracted to the course have studied in the sort of places like Red School. I don't know if you've heard of Red School or other kind of groups of women
Mm.
where the menstrual cycle is taken very, very seriously, and where there's an understanding there that if you really follow your cycle and adjust your behavior according to the cycle, that you will become less symptomatic. But nobody's actually done any research on that, because that side of things, those sorts of schools don't tend to be particularly academic. So one of the things I'm trying to do through my work is to make a bit of a bridge between academia and the experiential aspect of menstruation. Um, yeah, so there's a lot to be done.
Yeah, lot to be done. Actually, based on my experience, the medical nursing professionals, the public health professionals do not talk about the menstruation. Mm. And my colleagues from Sri Lanka and other countries who are the member of the Global South Coalition, and they kept sharing, oh, the speaker will be the doctor, nurses. And I was not excited much when they were excited, because historically the medical nursing and the public health courses appeared or practiced for many decades, and they never talk about the menstrual discrimination,
Mm.
and even the course is not explained. And right now, sometimes I follow the social media, which was run by the doctors, or the organization who invited the doctors, and then they have a conversation. Their conversation focused on the business perspective, like medical. Oh, they again created the fear. If you didn't explain about what is menstruation, what would be the basic or general symptoms, what are the discrimination associated with, how could we overcome these kind of things, they don't discuss. They discuss, oh, you need to come to the hospital, you need to do this kind of things. So this is how again they created the fear. I don't know whether I'm right or wrong, but I have that kind of feeling, not only in Nepal, from outside of
Oh
the
yeah. Oh, yes. No, this is worldwide, that there isn't enough training in medical schools. So it's the same here, even in the UK, that in medical school, the amount of time that's allocated to the menstrual cycle and to menopause is just a few hours. In a
yeah,
whole training, they'll just get a
yeah,
few
yeah,
hours on those topics.
yeah, yeah,
And that's partly because there isn't enough research to inform what they teach. So you see how this is a circle that goes around. So then you get a doctor who doesn't really know enough. I mean, it is starting to change here now. We are starting to get better quality of information. And part of that, though, a lot more of it that is happening around menopause than around menstruation.
yeah,
And so that's interesting. That there's all sorts of ideas about why that is so. One of them could be that, well, at menopause, it's not about blood anymore.
yeah.
So, you know,
I do
um,
agree. I do agree.
that's one
Yeah,
aspect, but also that women at menopause have more, perhaps more authority in their workplaces, in, wherever. So,
mm,
and not as much to lose, perhaps. Uh, excuse me. I think it's really hard for young women in workplaces, for example, or going to the doctor to really speak up for what they need, because they might lose their job, the doctor won't take them
yeah,
seriously, you know.
very
Um,
true.
but we are starting to see a bit of a shift. The other area that we've seen a big development here, which you may be aware of, is that something called the BSI, the British Standards Institution, which creates standards for workplaces in terms of safety, health, all sorts of different things. So over the last few years, the BSI created a policy standard for menstruation and menopause in the workplace, and I worked on that with some other people. Quite a big group of people actually worked on that. And we developed this policy to operate as a kind of baseline for this is what you need to do in order to not discriminate And those terms of discrimination and equality were very much used in that policy because we do have legislation here in this country that makes that a crime. If you have a workplace, you can't discriminate. So we did use that lens there, and that we're now developing the international standard, which will go out to hopefully countries all over the world. The BSI standard on menstruation in the workplace is free to download from the website, the BSI website. So that was issued in May 2023, and it's been downloaded by, I don't know what the number is now, but it's something, like 140 countries or something worldwide. So people are already working with it. So, and what that does really is it says that, you know, some of your employees are going to be menstruating and they need support, you know. It's just part of life. Some of them will need support at various times and they should get that, and you should do things like have free products available in the restrooms, in the bathrooms and toilets, and you should make sure that people have access to a toilet whenever they need it, not only when their line manager says they can go, because that's discriminatory against a menstruating person. So there are there we are seeing ways in which menstruation is being taken more seriously and seen as something that is a right to be able to menstruate, in where you've got washing facilities, and that it's not something that anybody should feel ashamed about. So I think we should, be happy about the fact that we've got as far as we've got, even though we still have a lot more to do.
Yeah, and then in your policy, what is the position of the menstrual leave?
Well, the certainly in the UK, the US, and Australia, and other similar countries, the term menstrual leave is really not helpful. We've seen this over the years that you just get, if you talk about menstrual leave, you just get bogged down in an argument about whether it's fair or not, and that, oh, women are getting some advantage that men don't have, and it just goes off the point and into this, like gender war thing. So what I've found is that it's more useful to talk about menstrual flexibility, that working schedules should be flexible enough for menstruators to be able to take time out if they need it because of their period. So the old idea of menstrual leave, which was very common in Asian countries and is based in old traditional ideas about health, actually, um, it did tend to be a blanket amount of time. So everybody gets 2 days off a month. And that is quite easily attacked in terms of, well, not everyone is going to need 2 days off. Why is it 2 days off and not 3 days off? It's not fair. Women don't work as many days. If you talk about menstrual flexibility, you've got more, there's more wiggle room to talk about it in ways that don't immediately create a backlash. So it's not that I'm afraid of a confrontation. It's not that. It's just that it wastes time and it just goes down a blind alley. And I don't think it's as useful for women. I think it's more useful for women to be able to do what they need, and that will vary. Someone who's got endometriosis is going to need different considerations than someone who
Yeah,
has a bit of menstrual cramping on day one.
yeah,
So, but the thing that was interesting in the research I did on the menstrual workplace policy in Bristol in England was that initially we set it up as menstrual flexibility meant you would pay the time back. So if you had to take some time off, you would pay it back at another time of the month by working longer hours. But actually, what we found was that that just wasn't practical because all the women were working so hard anyway. They were all so busy anyway with raising children, doing volunteer work, doing their job, looking after a household, that they never had the time to pay it back. And that they would come into work when they actually didn't feel well because of their period, just to be there rather than have to pay time back. So if we were really going to be looking after their health and saying, look, if you don't feel great, don't come in. You can work from home now. I mean, that's something we have the option. A lot of people can work from their home computer. But you can stay at home and not have to get dressed and do a commute on the train and come into the office. And because all of that is more burdensome, on the first day or two of your period. You don't have to do that. You can work at home and you don't, there's nothing about you paying time back. So we detached hours worked from, pay, and it became more about trust and accountability and professionalism and these kinds of concepts.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. We also advocate for the dignified menstruation friendly workplace. That means the flexibility in workplace and even the special provision from the government to take care of the serious menstrual health issues and not impose the mandatory menstrual leave. It's like few countries who have already practiced. And last year in Nepal, one province come up with this idea, and then I spoke in a television, radio, and then there was big confrontation. And the most of the activists, even the media people, they like to have the menstrual leave. So again, I feel like again there is a discrimination. They don't understand the dynamics of the menstrual issues, and then they appeal for the menstrual leave without knowing its implication, historical feminist perspective implication. It's really
Yeah.
sad.
Yes, in some ways it's harder for you, I think, because of you've had the tradition of menstrual
Mm.
leave and people are still attached to that. But am I right? My understanding of that is that it mainly is only used by women who work in jobs where they're not competing with men for the jobs. Is that right? It tends to be all women working in a factory, for example. So it's generally rather lower paid jobs and jobs that men aren't competing for. Is that
No,
right?
no, it depends on the
No?
context. It depends on the context. Only one province uh, come up with the idea of the menstrual leave. I think it is a kind of popularity, the political popularity as well. But it is not, even though it is in the proposal, but because of the debate going on in Kathmandu, it is still not formalized. But many informally, many both menstruators and non-menstruators are favor on the menstrual leave because they are so much inspired from Spain. Oh, Spain, the developed country has done this, and why not this for us? It is a very serious issue, and rather don't understand. So they start to put the blaming, but they don't like to understand the entire.
Yes,
Uh,
and what's happening in Spain is what people who've been studying it predicted was no one's using it.
yeah,
Who's
and,
using it because you've got to get a doctor's note. There's various things that just are really difficult to do. It might be easier for you just to go into work and
yeah,
take some painkillers,
yeah,
operate sort of,
mm,
like stress your body and mind out by pushing
mm,
yourself to be in work. That's easier than actually taking the
mm.
leave. So in a way, these menstrual leave policies are quite successful for the politicians, and that
yes,
it looks like they're doing something to support women, but in fact, nobody actually uses it. And then after a few years, they can say, "Oh, well, no one uses it, so no one needed it anyway."
yeah,
So, whatever.
yeah.
But it looks like they
Just a
tried.
political agenda, and
Yeah,
without dismantling the layers of the discrimination, we cannot utilize the menstrual leave or even flexibility,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
even flexible working hours.
yeah.
There is a story behind the curtains, so we have to make the workplace dignified. So it should be in the logistic plan, it should be in the safeguarding plan, it should be in the budget, it should be in the HR policy, it should be everywhere. We
Yeah.
cannot simply say, oh, our organization is a
Well,
policy, have
I'd
the
love
policy
to,
of a menstrual.
yeah, I'd love to have your input for the international standard that's being developed now, which is, open to comment. We've done a
Mm-hmm.
draft of it, and we're looking for comments from, different parts of the world about whether this is enough, whether it's going to work, whether it's useful. So if you just look up online International Standards Organization, ISO, and
Mm-hmm.
you'll see that it should be available there. If you just put in the search box menstruation, it
Mm-hmm.
should give you the draft of the policy to send in comments. I'm not sure if it's still open for comment, but I think it might be. If it's not, email me and I'll find out where you
Yeah,
can.
I will look into it, and if I won't get, I will let you know. We have 1 hour already, and we don't touch the
Oh,
topic.
right. Yes.
We don't start at it.
Well,
So
I have a few more minutes if there's any questions, but then I'm
yeah, there
afraid
are
I'm
so many
no.
questions, and thank you very much for connecting with the Oxford Press. They send me the online book, and I go through the line by lines, and uh, it is very comprehensive in one way and very concise, because you will get all information, all movements in one book. But those who don't have the understanding or the familiarization on menstrual movement, the writers like Kisling, like Chris Bowell, it is very, very difficult to understand. But for me, it's really a very good tool to discuss right now and in future as well. And there are so many questions, but in terms of the timing, I received the notice from my technical team. We will have another discussion, of course. Thank you very much for having the time and sharing your ideas. And once again, I would like to request you to share the information about the book.
Okay.
Very, yes,
So we can also, if you wanted to, we could do another event to answer the questions sometime. So if you've got a list of questions, keep them and we could do something later. So this is the book. It's called Reorganizing Menstruation, and the subtitle is Menstrual Innovations. So all the things that have been happening over the last 10, 15 years in menstruation, such as menstrual cups, menstrual workplace policies, all these things, and the redistribution of boundaries, capitals, and labor. So, how these things actually have a broader social effect in what I'm calling redistributing boundaries, which means that the menstruating woman is not as confined as she was. In some ways, she's more able to have her experience and to manage it in the way that best suits her, but that this has implications that are much broader than only menstruation. So it's a very big thing for societies to start dismantling this
yeah,
stigmatized part of life. There were reasons why it was stigmatized for so long, and
yeah,
it's having a big effect that we might not always understand or be aware of. So yes, it is a dense read, as you say. There is a lot in
yes,
it, Radha.
yes,
Um, I think that if you're serious about understanding menstruation, then it has a lot to give you, I think.
yeah.
Anyway, thank you so
Yeah,
much,
I
Radha,
do
for
agree.
hosting me
I do
today.
agree. Thank you very much for your time, your sharing, and everything. Friends, please follow in a Facebook page, a YouTube channel, Dignified Menstruation, and keep following our social sites. We will have the another session of the webinars. And if any of you like to reach out to Dr. Lara, have a like to conduct the webinars like this, you can reach out. If you have any problem, please let us know. And no matter where we are, we all are creating the space for the dignified menstruation. Thank you. Thank you so much, Lara.
Bye. Bye, everyone. Thanks for coming.